Welcome to my presentation about Chinese student involvement in Canadian higher education. I'm Ryan. Thanks for joining me. Chinese international students represent a large percentage of international students who choose to make Canada their home every year. In 2017, 28% of international students at all levels of study were from China, according to the Canadian Bureau for International Education. Looking ahead by next year, 20% of all students in Ontario are projected to be international students. Of course, it's amazing to have our international students a part of our communities. However, most Canadian schools approach student involvement from an ethnocentric lens. What I mean is, we expect all students to get involved in the same ways. From my experience, Chinese international students often experience different acculturation challenges than other international students. In particular, it can be pretty hard sometimes to get them more involved on campus. For my capstone, I defined involvement using Aston's theory of student involvement. A highly involved student may spend their time studying on campus, participating in student organizations and activities, and engaging frequently with their teachers. But what if Chinese students don't prioritize involvement as importantly as we do in the West? What's culturally important for them? In my approach, I want to honor our students' bilingual and bicultural identity. I don't want to force anyone to assimilate, but rather gain a greater sense of understanding for why our Chinese students engage in the way they do. At its core, my desired outcome is to achieve enhanced student involvement from Chinese students while honoring their bicultural identity. It's my hope to implement what I learn into my role at Renison University College. At Renison, we have an English language program that consists of 80% Chinese students every year. I help to plan events and workshops for them, but it's not always easy to get them involved. So I wanted to look at cultural differences that exist between East and West. We can't generalize the experiences of all Chinese people as one homogeneous group, but we can appreciate the human behavior patterns of citizens from the same country. In my literature review, I examined Confucius values in China's collectivistic culture. There are 4 areas that I found particularly interesting, so let's take a look. First is filial piety. Basically, this means that children must love, honor, and obey their parents. Student development theories encourage building autonomy, but interdependent relationships can be more valuable for Chinese students. Parents have a strong influence when it comes to academics, and they may be who decides their student will study abroad. Next, we have self-segregation, where Chinese students may socially separate themselves on campus as part of the Confucian value of interrelatedness. In a collectivist culture, Chinese students should stick together, and so we often see enclaves develop on campus. It doesn't mean that Chinese students don't want to engage with others, but it's just more comfortable. Third, we have self-perfection and the concept of hao shui xing. This is a Mandarin word meaning heart and mind for wanting to learn. Self-perfection is highly valued in traditional and contemporary Chinese culture. How does one do this? By learning through education. One perfects themselves morally and socially by mastering what they learn. In China, there is a cultural emphasis placed on effort in learning rather than how in Canada, we may focus more on ability. Students who aren't considered naturally bright are told they must study twice as hard to achieve the same results of their brightest peers. Through this process, students also want to avoid showing that they're not perfect. They want to avoid making mistakes, and so they stay silent in class to avoid losing any respect. Number 4, it's about the educational approach. Chinese international students may experience very different teaching styles and expectations in North America. And in China, lecturing is a common approach used by teachers. Students focus on memorization and repetition when they learn. You do not ask questions during class. Instead, engaged listening and silence are considered a sign of respect, and teachers are highly respected with strong authority in Chinese society. So what does this all have to do with student involvement? I'm glad you asked. Currently, gaps exist in research when it comes to assessing specific cultural demographics for students involved in international student programming. At most, research looks at how Chinese students learn in the classroom, not how they're involved in their campus community. So I then conducted an environmental scan of 5 Canadian universities to see what they do to support their Chinese students. I chose these 5 schools because in 2019, they were the top 5 universities in Canada who enrolled the most Chinese students. What did I find? Well, all 5 schools do acknowledge their Chinese students in some way on their websites. The most common way they offered support was through their student clubs. Sure, all universities have international student services, but few cater specific supports directly to Chinese students. Waterloo was a notable exception. They hosted send-off events in Beijing and Shanghai for first-year students before they came to Canada. I also looked at some Chinese universities. After all, how do they encourage student involvement? In the 2010s, many universities saw the emergence of credit marks for involvement that students must earn in order to graduate. They were called Innovation and Entrepreneurship Practice or Moral Education Performance Credits. Alright, when it comes to next steps, I'll be honest. Most of what I've learned can't really be incorporated into easy program solutions right away. But I've come up with 2 approaches that I can try to incorporate into my current work to get the ball rolling. First solution is to incorporate student involvement through a language course. In this approach, students would earn attendance marks by going to events or workshops to practice their oral English. This option can perk student interest for a few reasons. First, there needs to be a reason for students to get involved, and so incentives can help. Also, since teachers are highly respected, having them voice the importance of student involvement could really help. The next initiative is a parent's newsletter. Most schools communicate directly to the student and have a parent website in English. A Mandarin email to parents will tell them why student involvement is important, and they'll be encouraged to get their student involved. This approach follows Confucius's value of filial piety, where students follow directions from parents. Parents echo the value of student involvement. Hopefully the student will follow. I welcome you to check out my handout for more information about the rollout strategy for both initiatives. So in summary, we as student affairs professionals are responsible for finding culturally inclusive ways to engage and support students throughout their academic journey. Presently, we may not be considering the best ways to engage our students based on their cultural ties. Student affairs professionals can serve as educators and advocates on behalf of their international students. And finally, we must continue to ask, listen, and advocate for our international students to ensure that they have a learning experience that is truly transformational. Thanks for listening.